No country had ever beaten the US in the men's 4x100 meter freestyle relay. Ever since the event was introduced in 1964, the US were completely untouchable. Year after year, decade after decade, for 7 Olympics in a row, the US won gold. And with the fastest swimmers in the world on their team, the US also continuously destroyed their own world records, leaving all the other nations vying for silver. However, when the Olympics came down under to Sydney in 2000, Australia had somehow got it into their heads that they actually had a chance at winning the event. Australia hadn't even made it onto the podium in the previous Olympics, so for the Aussies to suddenly start thinking that they could actually upset the US stranglehold, it was a little strange. But this collective delusion that seemed to have permeated the country wasn't just blind faith. The Australian relay team in 2000 was the strongest it had ever been, including 2 of the most dominant swimmers in the world at the time, Ian Thorpe, also known as the Torpedo, and Michael Klim, who were both world record holders in other events, just not in the 100-meter freestyle. On top of that, just a year earlier at the 1999 Pan-Pacific Championships, the Australian team managed to beat the US team for the first time in history. However, at that championship, the US team was missing one of their star swimmers.
No Gary Hall Jr. though.
Gary Hall Jr. was an incredible sprint swimmer at the time. He was the best in America, though he was also a bit of a showboat, often dressing in flamboyant boxing robes and shadow boxing before races, happily paying whatever fines he would get for wearing non-approved apparel. But as he took these antics to the world stage, his quintessential American confidence was perceived by the rest of the world as arrogance. And after Australia's first win, when a newspaper asked Gary whether he thought the Aussies could win the following year at the Olympics, Gary certainly didn't pull any punches, telling the paper that the American team would smash the Australians like guitars. Of course, the following day, that quote was on the front page of every newspaper in Australia. And as the Sydney 2000 Olympics kicked off and the freestyle relay approached, the country's eyes were on the Australian team to make Gary Hall Jr. eat his words. Early in the day, with the support of his home country, Ian Thorpe smashed out a gold medal and a world record in the solo 400 meters. So as the crowd anticipated the 4x100 relay, which was coming up just an hour later, the tension continued to build. But as the event arrived, the teams were announced and the Australian crowd waited, anticipating the Torpedo to come out at any moment. He was nowhere to be seen. Ian, who was swimming in a full-body swimsuit for this games, had pulled it down after his 400-meter win, and with it still being wet, he was struggling to put it back on. As he pulled it up, he began to hear it tear. As the Australian team was announced, he finally appeared. The US team still weren't worried. They figured that Ian would be exhausted after his earlier win, and with Gary Hall Jr. back in their team, they were still confident that this relay would be just like every other Olympics, the US first and everyone else trickling in behind. But as Michael Klim from Australia swam the first leg, America started getting nervous. Michael surged ahead of all the other swimmers, and as he made it back to the blocks, he'd swam the first leg so fast that he'd broken the existing 100-meter freestyle world record. But as the race continued, the US gradually caught up, eating into Australia's lead, and as Ian Thorpe prepared for the final leg against Gary Hall Jr., he knew Australia was in trouble. Ian was fast, but he was better over longer distances. The 200 and 400-meter freestyle were his domain. Gary, on the other hand, was dominant in the shorter 50 and 100-meter freestyle. Ian figured he might be able to keep Gary off his tail if he started out ahead, and as he entered the pool, thanks to the strength of his team, he did start out with a lead. But as he neared the other end of the 50-meter pool, he witnessed firsthand how dominant Gary truly was over that length. Gary pulled out ahead, and the once optimistic Australian crowd went quiet. Ian felt like he was letting down the country. Gary's claim started rattling through his brain, taunting him. It was starting to ring true. Ian was getting smashed like a guitar. But after the turn, in the last 50 meters, as Ian lifted his head with each breath, he fought to close the gap. And it was working. As Ian caught up with each stroke, his confidence returned. He could feel the noise in the crowd building. He knew it would be close. So, in the final 10 meters, Ian stopped looking. He held his breath, put his head down, and he swam until But Australia hadn't just won gold. They'd also smashed America's world record by nearly 2 seconds. The Sydney crowd exploded with support, and just to rub salt in the wound, the Aussie team stood at the end of the pool, staring at Gary Hall Jr. and started strumming their air guitars. Gary Hall Jr. didn't return to the event after this moment, instead choosing to focus all of his energy on the 50-meter freestyle. 4 years later, at Athens in 2004, the US team now had a chip on their shoulder, and they were eager to prove themselves in the event they once dominated. And with the addition of Michael Phelps to the team, things were looking bright once again for the Americans. After all, it was this Olympics that Michael Phelps became a household name, earning himself 6 gold medals and tying the world record for the most medals of any color won in a single Olympics. But as the finals began, it quickly became obvious that the US dominance in the event was well and truly over. But this time, it wasn't the Australian team, but the South African team who blew everybody out of the water, winning gold and breaking the world record once again. And this time, the US couldn't even take home silver after their anchor, Jason Lezak, was edged out right at the end of the race by the Dutch team. 4 years flew by once again, and in the lead up to the 2008 Beijing Olympics, there were a few notable news stories in the American swimming world. Michael Phelps was gearing up to try and win a gold medal in every one of his 8 events. Gary Hall Jr. had come out in the 50-meter US trials wearing a cape that claimed he was the godfather of swimming, and then failed to qualify for the Olympics. But the story that really had people talking came from a voice outside of America, from an interview with the new 100-meter freestyle world record holder, France's Elaine Bernard. In a claim oddly reminiscent of what Gary Hall had said 8 years earlier, Elaine boasted that the French team would smash the Americans in Beijing. So as the teams made their way to Beijing and the games kicked off, it quickly became clear that this year's 4x100 relay would be a battle destined for the history books. America's B team sent shockwaves through the event when they beat South Africa's world record in the preliminaries. However, when both Australia and France's B team also clocked in preliminary times faster than the previous world record, the stage was set for a final in the event like nobody had ever seen before. As the starting beep sounded, the 3 countries set off. By the end of the first 50 metres, Australia's newest swimming superstar, Eamon Sullivan, had a clear lead over Michael Phelps, managing to continue pulling ahead all the way through to the end of the first leg, in which he managed to break the 100-metre freestyle world record again, stealing it from France's Elaine Bernard. It was a mirror image of what Australia pulled off in 2000. The Americans in the crowd couldn't believe that it was happening to them all over again. However, as each team's second swimmers entered the pool, the Americans caught up and ended up leading through the second leg. Then, by the third, the Aussies started to fall away, and it became a fight between France and the US. France pulled ahead, and as the race came into its final leg, it was up to the French former world record holder Elaine Bernard to finish the job and smash the US, just like he'd said they would. As Elaine entered the pool, the US once again sent in Jason Lezak. At this point, Jason was no stranger to taking home the anchor leg of a relay. Through his career, he'd taken home gold for the US team in just about every medley relay, which is the one where every swimmer does a different stroke style. But after being beaten by the Dutch team at the Olympics in 2004 and also swimming before Gary Hall's devastating anchor leg in Jason's first Olympics in 2000, Jason was determined to do whatever he could to reassert America's dominance and earn his first gold in the event. But as Elaine Bernard pulled away from Jason through the first 50 metres, it was going to take a miracle for Jason to close the gap. The NBC commentators started to lose hope.
I just don't think they can do it.
The US team watched on, devastated, as Elaine continued smashing them. Between each stroke, Jason was breathing on his right side, so he didn't even know that Elaine was pulling further ahead until he hit the end of the pool.
The United States trying to hang on a second.
But as Jason completed his turn and was now able to see Elaine pulling ahead of him, something quite remarkable started to unfold.
He's trying to ride that wave as much as possible.
After realizing that Elaine Bernard was swimming right up against the lane line, Jason too stayed as close to the line as he could, hoping that he could take advantage of the slipstream created by Elaine's wake. See, as swimmers push through the still water, breaking the water tension, the water behind the swimmer becomes easier to swim through. And if done strategically, the swimmers behind can use that dynamic to their advantage. And for Jason, it actually seemed like it was working.
Lezak is closing a little bit.
Elaine and Jason were neck and neck right up until the last moment, and then
Here comes Lezak! Unbelievable at the end! He's done it! The U.S. has done it!
the US reclaimed the gold, and they set yet another new world record for the 4x100 freestyle. Jason Lezak's split time has gone down in history as the fastest 100-meter freestyle split of all time, and with this win under his belt, Michael Phelps went on to successfully secure 8 gold medals, setting the world record for the most golds won in a single Olympics. As for Elaine Bernard and the French team,
I think